Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. This is our fourth block, the checkerboard tiles block, and as you can see, this piecing was pretty intense. So I've decided to keep the quilting very, very simple. I just marked out 1/4" masking tape, and I'm just going to quilt straight lines running right through the middle of those square in a square units and take them down through those little scrappy squares all the way through, basically from one edge to the other, diagonally across the block. I really don't think that you need a super intense quilting design when you have an already intense piecing design. So instead, I'm going to stitch it up a notch on a machine I don't get to use very often, and that is my Singer 27 Treadle, and I'm going to quilt this entirely with walking foot quilting. So let's get on the machine and learn a little bit about treadling and quilting straight lines together. So I got it started quilting a few lines here just to make sure that my stitches were doing the right thing and kind of remind myself how the machine worked a little bit and treadling and all that good stuff. So now I'm going to get started here off the edge of the quilt in the batting area, drop my walking foot down and bring the thread, bobbin thread up to the surface. And I do this on every machine that I use, no matter if I am quilting on a treadle, no matter if I'm quilting on a long arm or on a regular home machine. Okay, so I was fiddling around with this a little bit because I could not seem to get a nice tight stitch length. And I think a good part of that has to do with I was kind of being a little aggressive on my other lines, pushing the quilt through the machine really forcefully. So now I'm taking a lighter hand, just fingertip pressure, and really all I'm making sure of is just that the quilt is steering straight. And I set up my 1/4" masking tape so it ran right along the side of the line that I wanted to stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to stop. And I always stop with my needle in the down position. Now I'm on a treadle, so that's not automatic. So if I had to, all I have to do is just roll that hand wheel, and then that would get it down in the down position. Okay. Now the most important thing that I keep keeping in mind is just to make sure that the treadle is always rolling forward, meaning that this wheel is always turning towards me and not away. Pretty much the only time I break thread on my treadle machine is whenever the wheel rolls the wrong way, and that's surprisingly easy to have happen. So here we go. It's really very simple to just stitch right along the edge of that tape, but if you have trouble with that, and maybe you stitch onto the tape, then you can always position the tape so that you're a 1/4" away from the line that you want to stitch. That will work too. And you could always use the guides on your walking foot. As you can see, I have lots of different guides here on this foot. I could go with the edge of my foot. That's a 1/2 inch away. That would work too. Okay, just a little bit more stitching to finish off this line. And we'll tear off the tape and take a look. And I'm trying to take that lighter hand, not be quite so aggressive pushing the quilt through the machine, but it is one of those things that just, maybe it's just the angle or maybe it's having something to do with my feet, but I do tend to be a little bit more heavy-handed on this machine than my others. So now let's take a look. With this, the presser foot does not release the tension, so to release the tension you press on this part of the tension dial. This is one of those fun things about treadles. So many fun things about treadles, really. There we go. And now I can take off the tape. So there is that last line of stitching, and if you look at it really closely, I can see fluctuation there in my stitches where they go a little bit big and then a little bit small and then a little bit bigger. I'm going to play around with some settings here on this machine and see if I can get this to be just a little bit more consistent. So I played around with my machine settings a little bit, and I screwed in this, which is the presser foot pressure gauge. I screwed this in all the way, and I did notice a difference there. And I think that was what I needed. I just needed a little bit more pressure being put down on the presser foot, and that would help to feed the quilt more evenly. Now, of course, be careful with that. If you happen to have that dial on your home sewing machine, if you go too heavy, then it might feel like the quilt's kind of stuck and stiff. So you kind of have to play with it and just see what works best. And no, I loosened that up significantly when I was piecing the last time, Oops, it looks like my threading has come undone a little bit. There we go. That looks good. All right. But yeah, I remember loosening that up considerably when I was piecing over some bulky seam lines. So I think that might have been it. And I'm noticing my stitches are a lot smaller and more consistent. Of course, I have to be careful about this particular line of quilting because you can see I'm pretty much going from corner to corner across the block, and this is a very big block. So I want to be careful to not let it drag against the machine. So I'm going to roll it up here to the front, get started stitching again, and then as soon as it starts to hit here, then I need to slow down and maybe roll it a little bit this way and a little bit that way at the same time. Kind of like a croissant. There we go. That looks a little bit better. And it's feeling a little bit better. And it's just a very light pressure here. I'm just steering just to make sure that needle stays in line with the tape that's running right through the middle of my square and a square and right through the middle of these little scrappy squares in the center. So there we go. That looks great. I'm so pleased with how fast this is, with how simple it is. You know, never feel like you have to go crazy with a quilting design, particularly on a design like this where the focal point is definitely the piecing. You know, we did all of those tiny little squares in the border, and you know, you don't want to quilt over that with anything too dense. Number one, all the seam allowances behind it are going to make that challenging, and then number two, you're not going to be able to see any of that quilting because it's just going to get lost in all of those piecing lines and all of those busy fabrics. So there's not a lot of a point of going real crazy with a quilting design on this. So I like the straight lines. I think it's working really well, and I'm super pleased with how this is looking so far. And my plan is to take more tape and go over and run lines of tape the opposite way. So that way it forms kind of a grid that's on the diagonal over blocks that are also kind of on point. So I think the combination of those two things is really going to work visually, and the best thing is it's going to still feel very soft. And remember, you only need as much quilting in any quilt and any block as your batting requires. And this batting, I could stitch 8-inch lines and call it there. You know, I don't have to do even nearly this much quilting, but we do want to add just a little bit of an accent to all of this beautiful piecing we've done, and I really think that these diagonal lines are working great. So I'm just going to continue stitching across, working my way through this one line at a time. As you can see, this one particular line is giving me a little bit of a fit as far as what to do with the quilt as I stitch it, and I have positioned my treadle right up against a wall, so that is kind of making it a little bit difficult too. So, you know, I can't just have it slide straight off the back end of the tabletop. It's hitting the wall. So I'm going to be careful, just stitching right across this and then all of the rest of the lines. And then I'll meet you back here when I've taped more lines running in the opposite direction and we're ready to stitch those too. So I've taped my opposite lines and started quilting. And the biggest thing with this is just to watch out for where your lines cross. So I'm coming up on a spot right here, and I've got, well, really two things that I gotta pay attention to. Number one, my tape is actually kind of pulling up on this ever so slightly, and it's creating a little bit of a pucker. So I'm gonna grab my scissors and just snip that, and you can see it's not a lot of space, but that was just putting a little extra tension on the quilt right there, so I had to watch out for that. But what I really want to make sure of is that I don't get a snow pile, basically kind of a big bunch of fabric like that, kind of channeling in front of the foot, because as I come down and stitch across one of these perpendicular lines, that snow pile will just kind of fold over and form a pleat. So I want to watch out for that as I quilt. But so far I haven't seen any sign of it. It's more common whenever you're quilting with a very puffy batting, like a wool batting, and it can happen whenever you're working with a bigger quilt too, because it's harder to baste a bigger quilt. But on these blocks, it's really not going to be an issue, I don't think. If you quilt from the center of the block to the outside edges, that can help a lot too. but really it's just a matter of keeping an eye on your quilt. Just kind of keep your eye about right here, right in front of that walking foot. Whoop, don't stitch on top of your tape. Just keep an eye on that area. And then as you're quilting down and you see something like that happening, put a little bit more tension with your thumbs down on the quilt, and that can help to ease that fabric out so you don't stitch a pleat into it. So that's really the only thing you have to worry about too much whenever you're quilting a grid design like this. So from here, I'm just going to continue doing the exact same thing, breaking thread with each line of quilting and quilting these beautiful straight lines right across this checkerboard tiles quilt block. So that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed learning more about walking foot quilting and quilting on a treadle machine. This was a lot of fun, and I like any excuse I can get to get on my treadle and quilt with my feet. So if you'd like to find more videos for the Friendship Quilt Along and make a super scrappy happy quilt with me, here is a sneak preview for block number 5. Now you can check out all of the patterns and all of the tutorials I've shared so far at leahday.com/friendship. And just so you know, all of the tutorials and videos stay online indefinitely forever, so you can get started at any time and work at your own pace. So come and check everything out at leahday.com/friendship. Until next time, let's go quilt.